Hey folks, this is Rainiac, and today's video is something a little different from me. As you will no doubt be aware, the new series of Doctor Who kicked off last weekend with Asylum of the Daleks, and I'm going to do a video review of that episode. I intend to do a video review of each of the episodes a couple of days after they come out. Now I should say a couple of minor points to get out of the way first. Firstly, if you've not seen the episode yet, and you intend to see it, for the love of God, don't watch this video until you do, because there'll be spoilers. Big spoilers. And we'll get to those in just a few minutes. And secondly, for those of you who are not fans of Doctor Who, and amazing as it may seem to be, there are people who don't like the show. Don't worry, this is not going to be in place of video game videos. This is a little side project, as well as video game videos. So jumping straight into the episode, the first thing I should mention is just how unsettling this story was. And never was it more unsettling than whenever the minions of the story, the Dalek puppets, were on the screen. These guys were just plain creepy. I love the fact that they brought back the nanogenes from all the way back in Series 1 to explain their origins. And seriously, these were perfect minions for the Daleks. When that eye stalk came out of the forehead of that woman that the Doctor meets in the first minute of the episode, I'm not ashamed to admit I took a step away from the television. It was that unsettling. I do think the gun coming out of their hand was a little bit of a step too far. I understand they had to have a weapon of sorts to subdue the Doctor and Amy and Rory with, but I think they could have found a better way of doing that. Also, at one point, especially when the puppets were the corpses in the frozen Alaska base, they kind of reminded me a little too much of generic minions from Power Rangers. I mean, there's a scene in one of the early episodes of Power Rangers where the Putty Patrol steal one of the gang's morphers and hold it up and dance around. I got exactly the same vibe when they did that with Amy's wristband thing that protected her from becoming a Dalek. Speaking of Amy and Rory, I wasn't the greatest fan of how they were portrayed for much of this episode. I really wasn't the greatest fan of them getting divorced so suddenly. I mean, if you watched Pond Life, the 5-part prequel to Asylum of the Daleks, they do hint that there are marital problems and they're probably getting divorced. But anyone that didn't see Pond Life, and I know there were a lot of people that didn't, wouldn't have had a clue what was going on. I'm not against them doing a divorce in Doctor Who per se, but if they're going to do it, they could have at least made some subtle hints in the second half of last year's series that there were problems with their marriage. As far as I can remember, there were none in the second half of the series. In fact, stories like Night Terrors and The Girl Who Waited show just how much Rory cared for Amy. And even worse was how quickly the divorce was wrapped up at the end. And the reason for it, Amy can't have children now because what the Silence did to her at Demon's Run? What? That was even more out of the blue than the divorce in the first place. It works out for the best because Rory and Amy are at their best when they're together and a married and harmonious couple, but it was a very convenient end to that storyline. I also thought that Amy came across as kind of a bitch in this one. Now, I understand the reason for it. It was because of the whole not being able to have children thing, and that was explained, but even so, it didn't come across as the true Amy to me. I don't think this was Karen Gillan's strongest performance as Amy, if I'm being honest. Half the episode, she's being nasty to Rory, and for the other half of the episode, she's a damsel in distress, basically, worrying about turning into a Dalek. Speaking of which, what was the point of that whole plot storyline? I mean, I understand that there has to be a certain amount of peril within the episodes for both the Doctor and his companions, but that really didn't go anywhere. She got a wristband thing knit, means she's going to turn into a Dalek puppet over time. Then, when Rory goes to sacrifice himself by taking his wristband off to give to her, they find out the Doctor's already done it for him. And the Doctor has no repercussions as a result of this sacrifice whatsoever. So what was the whole point of that storyline? I really didn't get it. Was it just to set up the whole revelation that she can't have kids? If so, there were a lot of other ways you could have done that, and unless this leads to a payoff later in the series, I don't think it was needed personally. But that's just my opinion. Now, my major gripe for this episode is that for a story entitled Asylum of the Daleks, there really wasn't that much focus on the actual Daleks. It was more focused entirely on Oswin, and yes, I know that Oswin turned out to be a Dalek in the end herself, but that's not the point. For the most part, the Daleks exist in the storyline solely to act as obstacles for Rory and the Doctor and Oswin to overcome. Now, I do like the concept of the Parliament of the Daleks, and I really like the fact that their Prime Minister had the same voice as Dalek Khan, and reminded me of Dalek Khan. In fact, at one point I thought they were one and the same character, until I realised it was probably just due to Nick Briggs not having the greatest vocal range when it comes to Dalek voices. I mean, don't get me wrong, the guy is good, very good at Dalek voices, but it's hard to do a lot of different tones of voices for Daleks before they all sound the same. Or ridiculous. But that scene did have a massive continuity problem. I mean, it featured both RTD era Daleks and Daleks of the New Paradigm back from Series 5's episode Victory of the Daleks, but in that story, the New Paradigm Daleks destroyed the old Russell T Davies era Daleks because they declared them to be inferior, and now suddenly they're all buddy-buddy in the Dalek Parliament and coexisting happily. I mean, I get that they probably came together to combat the threat of the Asylum, but it would have been nice for the show to explain this to us rather than leaving it to us to imply it. I mean, the only bit of dialogue that the Doctor says about the Parliament is, "This is the Dalek Parliament." Yeah, that's really helpful. And it is kind of weird to see two different eras of Daleks in the same room, not trying to blast the hell out of each other. I mean, if you've seen the Sylvester McCoy episode Revelation of the Daleks, you know that if there's ever two different sets of Daleks on the screen at once, then 9 times out of 10 they're going to try and kill the hell out of each other. Speaking of Revelations, what a letdown the Special Weapons Dalek was. Yes, the Special Weapons Dalek was in the episode, but you'd be forgiven for not seeing it, because it was on the screen for all of 2 seconds, and it didn't even do anything. It just was in the background, and then I think it got blown up by the Dalek self-destruct. You know, the one that went, "Forwards! Forwards! Forwards!" And that's my Dalek impression for the episode, and it's terrible, by the way. But what a letdown. All they had to do was let the Special Weapons Dalek see the Doctor, go ballistic, start shooting at everything, blow up a few of its own teammates, if you will, and then get blown up by the bomb, and that would have been a much better news for the Special Weapons Dalek. I mean, for an episode that one of the major advertising parts of it was that every Dalek ever was coming back, they just weren't used that effectively. And a lot of them were Russell T Davies era Daleks, and quite a few of them were CGI'd. So in that respect, the episode was a bit of a disappointment. So apart from when the Daleks were on screen for any amount of time, this was pretty much the Oswin show from start to finish. And I may catch some heat for saying this, but personally I thought the story was all the better for this. This was a pretty damn good debut for our new companion, and it hit all the buttons of what the companion's first story should do. It quickly established her personality, it made her likeable with the vast majority of the audience, and we got a really interesting twist about her backstory to boot. The fact that she was actually a Dalek the whole time. I really like the fact that she was set up as pretty much the Doctor's intellectual equal in this episode, although I'm not sure if that's going to stick around when she becomes the companion full time. I really like the bits when she was flirting with Rory, and also when she explained why she called him Nina. Although, I don't think she's going to be a lesbian companion. Okay, guys, I mean, if they went that direction, I'd be fine with it personally, but I think even Doctor Who, that might be a step too far for what is still essentially a children's evening television show, even though, in my opinion, it isn't. If they go that way, fair enough, but personally, I can't see Moffat going that particular direction. But that ending was acted out superbly by both Jenna Louise Coleman and Matt Smith. I mean, I saw the twist coming that she was actually a Dalek way before it was revealed, like 25-30 minutes before it was revealed, but it was still handled beautifully. Some really good acting by both the actors concerned, and it throws up some really interesting questions regarding Oswin for the future. She's now presumably dead, so how on earth can she be the new companion? There's a number of theories already doing the rounds on the internet, and I've got a couple myself. Is it possible that later in the series, the Doctor's going to travel back to before she was Dalekified and save her, thus rewriting time, and then she could be the companion full time? Although that would open up some massive plot holes. I would also probably mean that the Doctor, Amy, and Rory would die in the Asylum without Oswin's help, so somehow I can't see that being the solution, but I could be wrong. Is it possible that she survived the explosion, perhaps? Have we got a River Song-like thing going on for the second series in a row? I really hope not, because I know how much the community hates River. My personal theory is that the eventual companion will be an ancestor of Oswin, rather than Oswin herself, because that to me makes the most sense and doesn't offer up as many plot holes as the other solutions. It's also possible that Oswin and the companion are not connected in any way. It could be that simply Oswin was a one-shot character, and Stephen Moffat was so impressed with Jenna Louise Collins' performance that he offered her the role of the next companion full-time. Like happened with Karen Gillan when she appeared in The Fires of Pompeii, and Freema Agyeman when she was in Army of Ghosts. These are all interesting possibilities, and knowing Stephen Moffat, they're probably all completely wrong, and he'll come up with something even more mind-blowing and brilliant to astonish us one more time. The only bad thing about Oswin is that she did kind of remind me a little bit of River Song already in both her personality and her backstory. But I have faith in Stephen Moffat that he won't make the same mistake he did with the second half of Series 6, because while initially the River storyline was interesting, it kind of ran out of steam pretty quickly. And last but no means least, that final scene on board the Dalek Parliament. I'm not a huge fan of them bringing back the whole Doctor Who thing, but I appreciate that because Stephen Moffat set it up so that's going to be tied into the 11th Doctor's final story, they kind of have to bring it up again. But I'm still not a huge fan. I do like the fact that Oswin has done a huge favour to the Doctor, maybe a favour that will be, I don't know, reciprocated later in the series when he saves her, but that's speculation for another time. Overall, this was a pretty good episode. It wasn't a great Dalek episode because they weren't the main focus, but given who was playing Oswin, Oswin was the main focus of the episode, and she had to be, I can forgive that just about. This was a pretty strong opener for what will hopefully be a terrific series, and a really good debut for our new companion. Next week's episode, Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, judging on the trailer alone, looks like filler. Fun filler, don't get me wrong, with a really good cast, but filler nonetheless. Feel free to offer your own opinions about this episode in the comments below. And please, if you disagree with anything I said in this review, don't be afraid to tell me about it. That's the whole point of a review. Until next week when I review Dinosaurs on a Spaceship, this is Rainiac saying TTFN.